What's good? It's your boy Fanon. Man, I'm really happy that Deontay Wilder showed a good heart, man. He really showed a good heart in an interview that took place last night on the Boxing Voice. Very good article. Guys do good work over there. And in the midst of this conversation that they had, interview that they had about him going over to Cardiff for the whether or not he was going to go to the fight with Anthony Joshua and Joseph Parker, he talked about the scenario where Eddie Hearn was trying to get him, trying to get him to fight Dillian Whyte. And unexpectedly, and better than I would have, he actually gave the dude an option on how he could get the fight. And I think it's such a fair scenario. He said, if Dillian Whyte wants to fight with me, because he said he felt sorry for Dillian Whyte. He thinks Dillian Whyte's a good guy, and he'd love to knock out Dillian Whyte. He said he'd have no idea, but he's no issue with fighting Dillian Whyte at all. But he said it's just the matter that Eddie Hearn ain't running nothing over here. And that was pretty much his whole justification for not going to the UK. Now, before I get into that, how fair a deal that is, and how I'm sure that Dillian Whyte and Eddie Hearn are going to jump at that. Let me tell you, I'm going to do a live stream later today. And so please hit the bell icon, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can participate in the live stream. And we have, very mature audience. We have a lot of fun in the conversations. We're able to talk about issues, all kind of issues in boxing, whether they're covered in a video or not covered in a video. And you get to do it real time, which I really do enjoy. So hopefully you'll attend the live streams, accept the invitation to attend the live streams and share your thoughts. And the best way, again, to know when they're happening is to hit the bell icon so you can be notified of when it starts. Now, because I don't do them on on any type of planned basis where I can say, okay, it's going to be at this time every, so many days. Now, that said, the offer to fight Dillian Whyte, actually, Anthony Joshua gave him two options. He said, one, put Anthony Joshua on the contract and said that if I fight Dillian Whyte, then I'll be the next mandatory for the next voluntary title defense for Anthony Joshua. Or have Dillian Whyte fight Luis King Kong Ortiz. And if he beats Luis Ortiz, then I'll fight him right away. And he said that he'll make it a voluntary. It doesn't even have to be mandated by the WBC. And that, I'm sure, is a very fair deal. Very fair deal. Luis Ortiz, I do believe, should still be somewhere in the top 10 of the rankings in the WBC. You have the number one contender, Dillian Whyte, and I'm sure he'd love to take that fight. That's easy money for Dillian Whyte, man. This is a 41-year-old guy coming off of a knockout loss to a bum like Dillian Whyte, like Deontay Wilder. So I'm quite sure that that's easy money. And since we know that Deontay Wilder is scared of Dillian Whyte and is ducking Dillian Whyte, then Dillian Whyte shouldn't have any problem whatsoever fighting his leftovers. A guy that Deontay Wilder, a 41-year-old, chinny dude that just came off of a knockout. Dillian Whyte should be jumping at that chance to take that fight, right? And put his number one position in on the line to make that happen. And let me assure you, for the people that are going to say in the comment section that Dillian Whyte doesn't have to do that because he's Deontay Wilder's mandatory. En contraire, mon frère. En contraire, mon frère. Hell no, he's not a mandatory for Deontay Wilder. And on top of it, he won't be in the position to be the mandatory for Deontay Wilder if Deontay Wilder chooses for up to 2 years. Up to 2 years. And let me explain to you why that is. Jose Sulaiman, who is the head of the WBC, said not more than 2 weeks ago that he wouldn't stand in the way of a major unification bout for Deontay Wilder because he said that Deontay Wilder has been a long-standing champ with the WBC. You know how he already has 7 title defenses, and that he wouldn't stand in the way. And on top of that, they weren't planning on ordering a mandatory fight for him anytime soon because he just fought his mandatory. And since he just fought his mandatory, he can now take a voluntary. How long does he have to take a mandatory? Let's see. Who's the WBC champion for the welterweights? That's Keith Thurman. Do you know how long ago Keith Thurman had a fight? About a year ago. And that wasn't even a mandatory. A year ago. And now a year later, he's just now in May, which will be over a year since his last fight, is fighting a voluntary. Deontay Wilder just fought in the beginning of this month, 2 weeks ago. He's got another voluntary to come. If Deontay Wilder decides to just rest for a year, Deontay Wilder can wait another year before there's another voluntary. And if he so chooses, he can wait another year to fight his mandatory, which pushes Dillian Whyte out at least 2 years if Deontay Wilder wants to push him out 2 years. But let's just say that he waits 2 years. Then what happens if his mandatory comes up? Then, my friends, the WBC has to choose who the mandatory is. And it can be anyone in the top 3. Do you know who's in the top 3? Dominic Breazeale. Dominic Breazeale can take the mandatory fight against the IBF and still come back and fight somebody and be the number 3 mandatory and still be the mandatory for Deontay Wilder next year. So for those people hoping that Eddie Hearn has Deontay Wilder cornered and he's going to get forced into this fight with Dillian Whyte, think again. Unless by force you mean up to 3 years. Deontay Wilder said in that interview, if he wants to play the waiting game with Dillian Whyte, he can play the waiting game with Dillian Whyte. And what's the word Anthony Joshua said about him? Oh, yeah. Freeze him out. Right? He can just freeze Dillian Whyte out and not give him a title shot because he didn't have to. And again, people thinking that the WBC being the number 1 ranked contender in the WBC means that you're the mandatory, that is not true. Go read the rule book for the WBC and you will see that that is not the case. But being the nice guy that I am, I will read you the rules. And it is in section 3.7 of the rules. But let's start with 2 rules. The rules and regulations of the World Boxing Council, the WBC. Coupled things that are important here. Number 1 is this: interpretation of the rules and power of the WBC president to act in the best interest of boxing. As special and unique circumstances arise in the sport of boxing, not all of which can be anticipated and addressed specifically in these rules and regulations, the WBC president and presidency, in consultation with the WBC board of directors, shall have full power and authority to interpret these rules and regulations and to issue and apply such ruling as he, in his sole discretion, deem to be in the best interest of boxing. So, right there, the WBC president says it right there. that if he thinks it's in the best interest of boxing, he doesn't have to apply any rules. He can interpret them however he wants. There's a loophole. That's what you call a loophole that you can drive a truck through. And that's section 1.2 of Article 1, applicability and interpretation of the rules and regulations of the World Boxing Council. But let's go down here to section 3, where they talk about mandatories, they talk about defenses, all of the type of things that you got that some of you people think mean that that Dillian Whyte gets a shot because he's the #1 contender. Article 3 of the WBC rules and regulations states, actually it's Article 3, section 3.7, or excuse me, 3.5 and 3.7. It's actually 3.5 and 3.7. This is the mandatory defense obligations. All WBC champions shall make at least one mandatory defense per year, unless an exception is granted by the WBC in its sole discretion. A champion may be required to make more than one mandatory defense per year if the WBC has mandated more than one mandatory challenger for any reason. No bout shall be considered a mandatory defense unless expressly approved as mandatory by the WBC and made exclusively against the official mandatory challenger designated by the WBC. And there's that line: official mandatory challenger designated by the WBC. A challenger who wins the title shall automatically inherit the mandatory defense obligations of the champion he defeated, unless the WBC, at its sole discretion, otherwise directs. Now, how do you become a mandatory? This is the section that applies to Dillian Whyte, and why this offer to fight Luis Ortiz is so fair. Designation of mandatory challengers. The WBC shall always have the discretion to designate a mandatory challenger by A, ordering a final elimination bout of 2 qualified contenders, or designating a qualified challenger as the official mandatory challenge. So there's 2 ways in which the WBC can say who a mandatory is, and it's at their discretion, which means it's what they feel like doing. And as I read you before, the WBC president can interpret the rules however the hell he wants just by saying it's in the best interest of boxing. Like, it's in the best interest of boxing to have a unified heavyweight champion. And we don't got to do shit in these rule book because we want to see Deontay Wilder fight Anthony Joshua, and Eddie Hearn is not going to use us to do his bidding. Sorry, they can do that because it's in their rules, which are just rules as long as the president of the WBC and with consultation of their of the directors or the board deemed to be the rules. However, for the avoidance of doubt, the highest rated or the highest rated available boxer in the WBC rankings is never, solely by the virtue of a position, the official mandatory challenger. Let's read that again for you. People over there who think, or over here, who think that Dillian Whyte is the mandatory. He's not the mandatory because he's the #1. Don't believe the hype. And this is, again, section 3.7, designation of mandatory challengers, for the WBCboxing.com. The rules and WBC rules and regulations, last edited in January of 2014. For the avoidance of doubt. So let me do, like, this is when you read articles like this, you read like rules and regulations, you like to put it in layman's terms. For the avoidance of doubt, just in case you guys are talking a bunch of shit out there trying to think you know something, right? That's avoidance of doubt. The highest rated or highest rated available boxer in the WBC rankings is never, ever, ever, not anytime, and that includes now, solely by virtue of, or solely because of such a position, the official mandatory challenger. They're never, just because a guy is number one, never makes him the mandatory challenger because he's in the number one position. Let's continue. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary, including any communications attributed to the WBC, no boxer shall be considered as or claim any privileges associated with being a mandatory challenger unless, 1, the boxer has been officially designated as such by the WBC president or the president's designated representative, and 2, the WBC Board of Governors has voted to authorize and ratify the designation of such a boxer as mandatory challenger. So, stop with the dumb shit. This dude, Dillian Whyte, is not the mandatory challenger for the WBC champion because he has not been designated as that by the WBC and ratified or approved by the board. And you're never in the WBC the mandatory challenger based on the virtue of your ranking. And that's in the rules of the WBC, who Dillian Whyte is a number one contender. And just to go over it again, he doesn't have to do it but one time a year. But this is Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder does not have to have a mandatory for but one time a year. And that is only if the WBC president makes him. They can give him an exemption for it. Because, like I said, in the first part of it, any and all rules in the rule book for the WBC can be interpreted by the WBC president and thrown out whenever he feels it's in the best interest of boxing. Dillian Whyte is not the mandatory challenger for Deontay Wilder, and quite honestly, he may never be, because Suleiman Jr. just said a couple weeks ago that Deontay Wilder just fought his mandatory and he can fight. And this was after he fought Luis Ortiz. He said he can have another mandatory. He can have another voluntary. And after that, he might not have to do it for a year. So if Deontay Wilder makes enough of a case and Deontay Wilder's lawyers make enough case to Jose Suleiman that, look, they're trying to usurp the best interest of boxing by using your rules to pimp you. It's not in the best interest of boxing to allow somebody to avoid a unification fight and put in their fighter in order to do it. Easy argument to make. Whether or not Jose Suleiman agrees with it or not, hey. But then also there's the ratification of it. I don't know how many board members are there, but if there's 9 of them, it's probably going to be an odd number to break a tie. If there's 9 of them, and I don't know what the number is, I guess I could look it up, but I'm not going to. 9 of them, all you got to do is get 4 of them to say, nah, Dillian Whyte's not the guy. And you politic it that way. So that's why I say it's just a fair option. Dillian Whyte, get going in there and fight. Either put Anthony Joshua's name, get Anthony Joshua to agree that they're going to fight next. Or put Dillian Whyte in there with Luis Ortiz, and then Deontay Wilder take him on as a mandatory. Because then he would have earned it by beating Luis Ortiz. But we know damn well he's not going to do that because he can't beat Luis Ortiz. That would be Eddie Hearn putting his number 2 heavyweight on the line against Luis Ortiz, which he's not going to do. So please, let's stop the nonsense. If you put in the comment section that no, Dillian Whyte's the mandatory, he's got to have a fight. Sorry. Go read the WBC rule books, fella. Go read the WBC rule book. I've been watching boxing for 30 years. I know the rules. He's going to be the mandatory. He's not going to have anywhere to run. The fuck he's not going to have somewhere to run. He can just stand still for 2 years and not have to fight the dude. And then in 2 years, he still might not be the mandatory because the WBC might not designate him as the mandatory because being the number one guy does not, by virtue of being number one, does not make you the mandatory. Fight Luis Ortiz or shut the up. And with that, I'm out. Peace.